Hey everyone, how's it going? This is Tyler here with Rotora Games for episode 2 of the Idle Game Dev stream. Today I have with me Michael Townsend of doublespeak Games. Michael? Awesome. Thanks, Michael. So we got a bunch of questions from y'all in advance. If you haven't seen before, every week we post out a link to submit questions to our speakers. We got some good ones this week. I think this one will be probably pretty open-ended. Lessons learned hanging out with Sean last week is that we can very easily talk. Oh no, I can't hear Michael. Oh no, say something.
Uh-oh.
This is on me. I need to learn how to
Oh
do this
no.
again. All right, Michael. Hey everyone, I'm Tyler, blah blah blah, Rotora Games, Idle Game Dev, episode 2 with Michael Townsend of doublespeak. Michael, intro, round 2, go.
Hey, I'm Michael from doublespeak. I made A Dark Room way back in the day, which was a narrative-focused idle game, and I continue to make narrative games to this day. My latest game, Penrose, is out. It's a 50,000-word branching narrative. If you want to play something weird and reading heavy, it is available.
Awesome. I think we got it this time. All
Yes.
right. So we're going to go ahead and open up with the questions from the audience. So I have a bunch of questions brought in advance. Again, this is just going to be kind of a chill fireside chat. So we're going to start off with a question. I think this is a pretty fun one just because it jumps into like all the ways to play. Do you know what the fastest anyone has ever beaten a dark room? And is there any sort of speedrunning community?
So there actually is. Not that I'm aware of in the web version, but in the iOS version, Amir noted that people were starting to speedrun, and so he put a timer at the end. And I think the fastest that anyone's beaten it is like 2 minutes and 45 seconds or something insane. Yeah. Yeah, if there is a speedrunning community, it's on the A Dark Room subreddit is probably where most of that's going down.
Do you know if there's any sort of actual record, like is anyone storing kind of the list of top speeds?
Last I saw, it was just screenshots on the subreddit. But yeah, it's insane. I have no idea how someone beats it that fast. I really don't understand.
Yeah, I can't even. I'm trying to work through stoke fire, gather traps, straight. I guess it's all about optimizing once you get into the world, right? Once you start
and
embarking.
I think the speedrunners do it without waiting. So like on the iOS version, Amir did some tweaks so that you can actually beat the game without having any villagers at all. And so you spend most of your time going out into the world and grabbing materials and bringing them back. And so you just do that real quick, I guess. I have no idea.
Yeah. So I guess you get the compass and you go, and then that's cool. So next question. What was the inspiration for the theme of the game? So it's a very interesting theme because it does kind of go from this what seems like a very medieval environment, and then, without spoiling it, it definitely steps away from the expectations. So
yeah, and that's what I wanted. So I really, when I started making A Dark Room, it was entirely sort of stream of consciousness. I'd sat down after playing Candy Box, and I was like, I bet I could add narrative to that in an interesting way. And so I just sort of sat down and started hacking on it. And the theme kind of just grew organically, but I did know that I wanted to pair the player's understanding with the world with the opening up of the mechanics. And I wanted to trick you, I guess, as many times as I could. So at the beginning, it feels very sort of medievally. And as you learn more about the world, as the mechanics open up and as the world opens up, you learn more about your place. And I want to subvert expectations as much as I can. But yeah, the theme just grew totally organically, and it just sort of happened.
This is a good follow-up to that from Gamerboy Gaming. Did you have any other ideas for the game that never made it into the final release?
Yes. So I don't know how much I want to spoil. I guess I can spoil it. This game's been out forever, right? I can just spoil it.
Yeah. You're the creator. You're allowed to spoil it.
Yeah. So the original design actually had, I think it was five gameplay phases. So in the finished product, so there's the room, and then the village, and then the world, and then the spaceship. So there's 4. There were going to be 6. So in between you exploring the world by yourself and finding the spaceship and lifting off, there was going to be sort of a real-time strategy kind of deal where you you could, deploy your villagers as armies and move them around the world and take territory. And then after the spaceship liftoff, there was going to be a similar sort of universe exploring phase. But I got about 2 months into the project, and that's basically where my creative high ends. Yeah. So I'm really excited about a thing, and I can go hard on it for about 2 months. And then after that, it just becomes work, and I get really frustrated, and I don't want to do it anymore. And with A Dark Room, it was just a hobby. Like, I was building it in my spare time, working another job, and I got to that point, and I was like, you know what? If I don't wrap this up right now, it's never going to get finished. And so I wrapped it up.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're almost describing the kind of pipeline of like Spore, the getting to the like seeing the whole universe and bouncing around between it. Yeah. Have you ever played the game Crank? It sort of does that.
No.
It's another idle game that's a mobile web one where you kind of bounce around through the universe once you get to that. It does the same sort of like into space feel.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Would you consider ever going back to it and adding those types of once wanted but now?
So there have been 2 brief attempts to re-engage with this work for me. I was working with Amir to do an expansion for ADR that would add a few more locations and a few more mechanics. So there had been some design there, but I just didn't want to do it. I'm really fickle when it comes to my creative energy, and I'm only able to maintain interest on things that I'm actually interested in, and I like to jump around a lot, so it didn't really bear any fruit. I'd also done some planning for a sequel for ADR, and I kind of knew how it was going to open, and I kind of knew where it was going to go. And then Space Plan came out and ruined everything.
Damn those potatoes.
God damn it. But like basically the opening that I wanted and sort of the gameplay that I wanted to do was done. Space Plan did it. So
it's a good game. It's a pretty game.
It is a good game.
Yeah.
It's really good. Yeah.
Quite love it. So let's see what else we got here. Do you want to talk a little bit about working with Amir and on porting the game, like kind of handing off the control of getting it to other platforms?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, that was the whole A Dark Room story is just kind of unbelievable and made up of entirely purely luck. So I released A Dark Room for free on the web as a side project that I just did for fun. I didn't think anything would come of it. And then it did go viral completely unexpectedly, and Amir found it in Hacker News. So he came across a post on Hacker News when he was at a particular point in his life where he was ready to try something else, to do something for himself and see what he could build. And so he reached out to me and he said, like, look, your game is cool. I would love to try my hand at doing a port to iOS. Would that be okay? And I just thought, yeah, whatever. More art is better. So just do it. Go nuts. If it makes any money, we could do a 50-50 split. And if you want to make any changes to it, I get creative veto on anything you do, but otherwise go nuts. And he agreed to that and went away, came back a few months later with a playable game. And I mean, I had almost nothing to do with it. It was really, really, really bizarre. And he's, from that point, kind of taken the reins on maintaining that project, which is absolutely amazing. Like, I wish that I could do this for all of my projects. Like, I just make it, put it out there, somebody else takes it and maintains it forever would be absolutely great. I would love that so much. Amir has been wonderful. He does so much more work on A Dark Room than I ever have.
So the follow-up question that I sort of have to ask at this point is, can you talk a little bit about the Switch shenanigans that you all went through at launch?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's hilarious. I think that it probably wore him down a bit. I know that there were some pretty unkind articles that came out that hurt him pretty hard, but in retrospect, the whole thing is just kind of hilarious, right? So he loves Ruby. So you got to start with this. Amir is really into Ruby, and he wants to program in Ruby everywhere. And so to make ADR on iOS, he actually was working with this Ruby framework that allows you to write in Ruby and deploy to other platforms. And he continued that. He's sort of taken ownership of that project. It's called Dragon Ruby. But when he did the Switch release, the first thing that he did was port Dragon Ruby to Switch so that he could write in Ruby. And he quickly discovered that by doing so, he actually could just embed a Ruby interpreter into the game. And he had it in there as a developer console, as a fully featured Ruby interpreter. And at the very last minute, he decides that he's going to leave it in there. He's going to leave this Ruby console in there as an Easter egg. So if someone decided to plug a USB keyboard into their Switch and hit the tilde button, this Ruby console would come down, and they could do whatever they wanted in it. They could write an entirely new game if they wanted, turning the Switch into a developer platform. Now, Amir thought that was great. Amir and I very much share this games as educational tools and bringing people into programming and STEM from games, because that's the pipeline that both of us took. And so that's why all of my stuff is open source. If anybody asks me questions about things, I'm really, really responsive. I want people to learn. And so Amir is exactly the same way. So he was really excited. He was like, we're going to turn every Switch that every 12-year-old kid has into a developer box, and people are going to play, and it's going to spawn this whole new, wave of developers. And so he embeds it. I think it's great too. He hides this thing, and I'm like, all right, it's going to be like a year before someone notices that this is in there. And then the poor fool makes a big announcement about it, like a week after release. He makes this big announcement that he snuck this thing in and it was there. And Nintendo freaked out, and his publisher freaked out, and the game got pulled.
Oof.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. And I mean, you kind of have to understand where the platform developers are coming from, but like it is unfortunate that they have such a closed box mentality.
Oh, absolutely. And the thing is, I honestly believe that if he'd been really, really open about it, he probably would have been able to get away with it. I think that Nintendo was less concerned about the fact that there was a Ruby interpreter in there, and more concerned that it wasn't a piece of functionality that they knew about, and so that they weren't able to test it and make sure that it was safe and secure and all that stuff.
Yeah. So always be careful of your Easter eggs. Yeah.
Always be careful about your Easter eggs. If you're going to publish on Nintendo, you tell them everything, because they're Nintendo.
Yeah. So you touched on this a little bit during this question, but I'd love to hear how you got your start, sort of in not just game development, but software development, and kind of that path that took you to making a darkroom.
I mean, it's the very typical, very standard privileged white kid narrative. My dad worked at Nortel, which was Bell Northern Research, way back in the day, before they exploded. And so he was in tech professionally and knew that it was going to be really important. It was going to be a really big deal. And so he made sure that there was a computer in my house from a very, very young age that I could play around with. So we had, an old 386 box with DOS and a copy of QBasic when I was like 8. And I started poking around in it, because what else are you going to do as a nerdy kid with very few friends? So I started poking around. I learned how QBasic worked. I started writing some really simple games that sort of mimicked the things that I enjoyed playing. And I mean, I guess the rest is history. I've been on a software path ever since, and been making games in my spare time ever since. And only with the release of A Dark Room did I kind of realize that maybe I could do that for a living instead of making websites for people.
Sure. Do you still, I mean, I guess it's interesting to see that, like, coming from a web dev perspective, your games are very much built around that architecture, right? Like Darkroom is very much a website in its initial format.
Yep.
So how do you feel like that particular perspective of just kind of like knowing web in particular, how did that transition to you as a game developer?
Probably in a couple of ways. I mean, I love interface games, and you probably noticed playing a few of my games that I just adore interface games. I love games that are just an interface that you play with, and the mechanics are learning what the interface does and how to use it and what you can do and where it goes and what it means. I love that kind of game. That probably comes from spending a lot of time on the web and doing a lot of web work. But technically, the most important thing I think that I learned from web is just responsive design. So I build my games to easily scale to any screen shape, any screen size. There's no custom work to make sure that works. Everything just sort of flows and displays neatly on any device that you care to engage with it with. And that definitely comes from my web dev background.
Yeah. I just want to point out, personally speaking, I think one of the coolest things about A Dark Room is the title pop-up. I know we talked about this a little bit before, but for those of you who haven't played it on web, if you're playing for a while, you step away and come back, anytime an event occurs, it switches to the blinking event in your taskbar. And man, does it not pull you back to darkroom every time. So I think that's a pretty genius way to get re-engagement on web. I'm curious if that was something that did you see another game do that, or did that come from your web experience in particular?
I had definitely done that professionally before. It's I would hesitate to call it a dark pattern, but it's kind of an annoying pattern that websites will do to try and get your attention again. Like if you're on an e-commerce site and you add some stuff to your cart and then you go away and leave that tab open in the background for long enough, maybe it changes its title to try and get your attention.
Yeah.
But that engagement loop is really important for anything that you want to stick with people, especially for a game like A Dark Room that takes place over quite a long period of time. You want people to engage with it regularly, because then it becomes sort of part of their daily routine, becomes part of their thought patterns, and then it's got its hooks in them, and then they'll never get away, right?
Yeah. All right, so I got another question here. This one's from Daniel Zane. Thank you, Daniel. What were the biggest challenges during the design phase of the game, and how did you manage to surpass them or get over them?
Okay, I guess there are kind of two. So at the very beginning of A Dark Room, you are in, a dark room. The only option that you can do is light this fire. And when you light the fire, the whole game then opens up and starts. And there's a brief amount of time between when you light that fire, when the builder shows up, the room's got to be warm enough to nurse them back to health. And then once they're up and moving, then you can start building stuff and doing things. And in the initial design, there was this problem where you could light the fire and then go away. If you just click that light fire button and walk away, what would happen is the fire would light, and before the game engine really kicked in, the fire would go out and the builder would never wake up. And that just does not work for an idle game. You need at least for that beginning interaction, you really need people to be able to walk away and come back and see that things have changed. And the game grinding to a halt in the first 30 seconds kind of floored that. So that was dealt with by tweaking timers on fire cooldowns and all that stuff to try and stretch that as long as they could. And then the simple hack is once the builder is awake, she will actually bring in a small amount of wood income and also keep the fire just barely lit for you, so that nothing will lock down. As soon as the builder wakes up, the game will progress by itself for quite a while. But that took a little bit of finagling to get right, and I think was really important. The other one, now you have to understand, I wrote this game a really long time ago, so don't judge me, but my map generation code is really, really naive. It's randomly generated with some eye towards trying to make maps that are a little bit interesting and complicated and won't screw you over. And 99% of the time the maps generate great. And every once in a while I found that a map would get generated that was impossible. There'd be just enough gap between one of the other outposts where you can refill your food and water and the next sort of step to unlock the game. And that was really frustrating because it only happened 0.1% of the time, and I didn't really want to mess with the map generation anymore. And I spent a while just being like, oh God, how do I make sure that this doesn't happen? And the ultimate fix was I added 2 perks to the game where if you die of starvation enough, you get better at managing food. You start using food more efficiently and you eat less as you move. And the other one is if you die of thirst too many times, you get better at managing your water, and you can get a little bit farther in the map with the same amount of water. And those perks were specifically put in there to defeat impossible maps, which is this laziest, hackiest way of solving that problem. But God damn it.
They only trigger if you've made the failed state.
That's right. You fail state enough, and then they give you this perk. It's just like, it's my fault. I screwed up the map generation.
That's pretty genius. I love it. Yeah, it's interesting, especially with proc gen, right? There's always that 1% corner case that you can't necessarily solve. So solving it outside of the procedural system is a great way to handle it, I think. Personally, I think that's a great solution, not a hacky solution.
It's definitely a hacky solution, but that doesn't mean it's not also great.
It's both, yeah. It's definitely both. Yeah, it's definitely a challenge in any, I think, kind of random generator proc gen format, is that not only do you have those corner cases, but then you also have the broad feel that you want to get. And I'm curious for your perspective, both on the kind of difficulty curve getting further and further out from the dark room, but also just the spacing, because you kind of get that road structure in the map. Is were you going for a particular aesthetic in the map? Like, did you want it to feel like, a desolate city? Did you want it to feel like a particular narrative space, kind of that world narrative? Or were you okay with it being so random that like each person got a different kind of environment?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted it to be pretty random, but I also wanted it to be, I wanted to get that sparseness. I needed enough distance between milestones, and I need to make sure that at each milestone, important thing was far enough apart from one another and probably in different directions, and that there was enough secondary objectives near your primary stuff so that you could grab things and resupply and explore. Because it wouldn't be any good at all if all of the major milestones were sort of clumped together. That'd be shitty.
Yeah. So we got another question here from Dane. Were you hesitant to change the game from only text-based to representing the map visually for the exploration phase?
Nope, not at all. That was originally the plan. My only design guide for that game, and I always try to give myself restrictions because I find that restrictions breed creativity. And so the restriction for a dark room was nothing but characters, nothing but text. And so the map is also characters, it's also text. But yeah, I wanted that change from a very interfacey sort of, you're pushing buttons and moving things around, to now all of a sudden you're viewing a map and you're moving around the space. And I wanted that to be a big change. I wanted that to have an impact on the player. I wanted it to be unexpected. I wanted it to be this big, like, oh wow, this game is bigger than I thought moment.
So full 3D, is that the next step in immersive first person? The space plan. There's the space plan again.
Oh God.
I'm gonna have to track down the space plan devs and see if they say dark room. See if it goes both ways. So okay, I got another question actually on that topic from Akerson. As perhaps an unknowing pioneer of a new genre, did you set out to push this game type in new directions? Like, was this originally your goal? Like, I'm going to take idle games and do something new with them? Or were you kind of surprised by the fact that it was this genre and it was a space that you were unknowingly kind of entering into?
A little bit of both, I guess. I mean, back when A Dark Room was written, we didn't have a genre for it. The term idle game or incremental game did not exist. No one knew what to call these things. There were a few of them on the market. Now, I guess you could trace the genre all the way back to like Cow Clicker on Facebook, way back in that very first explosion of Facebook social games. But my first introduction to the genre was Candy Box. So Candy Box was very popular, did the rounds on the internet back in 2013, and I saw it and I thought, hey, I really love how they're using the space in the interface to hint at future content, and I really like how each phase of the game is different and unexpected, and I really like how everything just grows from this tiny seed. And man, the amount of effort to make something like this compared to other kinds of games is really low. And I think I could probably add some really interesting narrative, because Candy Box is great. Like, really, really great game. I absolutely adore Candy Box, but its narrative was very stream of conscious. It wasn't really focused. It was kind of like a dream. I wanted to do something with cohesive narrative that used the mechanics to tell a story and to create a connection between the player and the player character, and then challenge that connection. So I was doing it on purpose. I wanted to do a game in that style that told a story. Did I know it was going to be successful? Absolutely not. I thought that it had the potential to be viral, because I'd seen Candy Box go viral, and I know that people are bored sitting in their offices and they want something to poke at while their code is compiling or whatever. I figured it had the potential, but I certainly didn't expect anything to happen. The fact that it went viral and did as well as it did, and then now there's this huge genre of idle games has exploded and it's become a thing. No, I don't think I saw that coming.
Yeah. I actually think to that topic, a kind of follow-up question. There's this interesting paradigm that happens, especially with like a new emerging form, right? The first game comes out, or first of its type, and it's heralded as, a unique, original, and kind of this brand new thing. And a lot of times when the second thing comes out, it can actually be labeled as like a clone or a derivative, and it takes 3 or 4 of something in a space before it's, oh, this is a genre, this is a space, right? You get rogue, and then you get roguelikes, and then you get doom likes, and you get this space. Did that happen to you with Darkroom early on? Did you ever see people labeling it as like Candy Box like, or like clone, or anything like that, or was it very like approached as like this is step 2 in this genre?
I think it definitely got referred to as Candy Box like once or twice, which I'm totally cool with. Like I was in contact with anyway the developer of Candy Box, and we both love each other's work. So being labeled as a Candy Box like is totally fine for me. If you think something is original, you're just not familiar with the source material, right? Like there are no new ideas under the sun. We ran out of Scratch back in the 60s. Everything's a copy of something else. And so clone, I don't think I never got the term clone, but Candy Box like definitely. And then we finally settled on genre terms. Not my favorite genre term, but I'll take it.
Candy Box like, that would have been fantastic. You got roguelikes, doom likes, Candy Box likes.
Candy Box likes.
Idols.
I really like extra credits called them unfolding games. And I think that is so much better than idle.
I've personally, the one that I like using is blossoming games.
Yeah.
And that comes from Max Kaminsky. There's the idea of games that are like you're gardening instead of mining or destructive. And I always felt like there's a very clear connection there between those kind of gardening games and a lot of these idle games where you're growing a space of play, right? You're starting with nothing and expanding your space of play.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think unfolding, blossoming, yeah. There is an interesting space there though, because idle / incremental / clicker, the kind of all these genre terms now include so many spaces that they now retroactively, I think, include a lot of things. Because like Farmville is an idle game,
yep.
Absolutely, but we didn't
have
the
term.
Yeah, and we didn't have a term for it at the time, right? Like you can play SimCity and never press fast forward, which why would you ever do that? But that is suddenly an idle game almost at the speed you can play those games. So I am actually curious if we want to further elaborate on this kind of genre definitions that we have, because it is an interesting, like, we talked about this before the stream, is like when you base it on mechanics, you get into these very weird, wavy situations. So if you want to elaborate on that for our viewers.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, right? Like we do this weird thing in gaming where we call things genres based on their mechanics and their aesthetics. Like if you've got a game that is in the first person and there's a gun in it, we call it a first person shooter, and that's a genre. And it doesn't matter if you're using that space to do violence or to tell a story, or it doesn't matter what emotions you're trying to convey or what setting it's placed. It doesn't matter. It's a first person shooter. And we've got the same problems here, right? Like even within the genre of idle game, we have vastly different experiences. And then there are games that are outside of the idle game blanket that I think are very, very similar from an aesthetic perspective. Like Cookie Clicker and Candy Box are completely different games. They are completely different games. Like Cookie Clicker is all about numbers going up, and the game itself doesn't really ever change, right? Ever. It's exactly the same game. The mechanics are solid through the whole way. It's not using differences in kind at all. It's using differences in aesthetics and increasing numbers to make you to continue your engagement. Whereas something like Candy Box is very much more focused on exploration. It's a completely different genre. I don't think it's the same, even though it's based on numbers going up at its core. And likewise, Farmville was definitely one of the first idle games, and it was, I believe, what spawned the satirical game Cow Clicker that was, I suppose, the proto-idle game, proto-clicker game. And it was made as a joke. But like, we don't call Farmville an idle game or a clicker, but it is.
Yeah.
If we want to go there. And like most mobile games now have idle mechanics, right? Where you'll say like build a city, and then it's going to take you a day for that city to get built, and you got to go away and wait for your notification to pop in. That's an idle game, but it's also a strategy game. So what do we call it?
Yeah. So blossoming, unfolding, all these terms we love. Idle, it's perhaps too broad. I do think that the concept of incremental as a term is a little more readable, but progression is a thing where, like, if you're talking about incremental specifically in terms of it progresses forward, then pretty much every RPG uses RPG progression systems, right? Leveling up, bigger armor, better items. So there is
different kind of progression though, right?
Yeah.
Like incremental games specifically progress the mechanics, where there are vastly different or there are vast shifts in kind where you're doing different things at each stage of the game, and the mechanics themselves change drastically. Not a lot of games do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's move on to a good follow-up from that is have you considered making another idle incremental game with these sorts of mechanics?
I have thought about it a couple times. I'm at a point where I feel like, at least for the base genre, the market is tapped out now. Like there's so many games out there, and there's so many ideas out there that if I were to make another one, it would be a drop in the bucket, and it wouldn't be anything special. If I was going to return to the genre, I would need to have an idea that is different, something that is completely different than everything else out there. And that, I think, really comes from mashing ideas together. So it would probably not be a pure idle. It would be an idle mashed together with something else in a novel way that nobody thought of yet.
Would you continue to use the ADR brand, or would you start fresh?
Oh, I'd probably start fresh. I am so allergic to sequels and remakes and all of these things. I just want to move on to the next thing. I want to do a new thing, a next thing, something different.
Yeah.
I know that if I were to make an ADR2, it would probably make me a bunch of money.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to do it because I'm allergic to success too, apparently.
Allergic to money. Yeah, it's actually interesting because like after Merchant's success, I made Space Merchant. The other founder, the original creator Merchant, we branched, and he made Merchant Heroes. I made Space Merchant. We used Merchant as a brand, as kind of a name, but like both of those games are very divergent from the original game. And we're kind of coming full circle now with making multiplayer Merchant as like sort of the sequel, like the closest thing to a sequel we've done. But each game, really, our goal is to make it so different from the others that they may have the same brand, they may have the same identity in like play space, but yeah, making actually a 2 to a game, I think as an indie is just why? Like if you're indie,
why.
Yeah.
Yeah, just your job as an indie developer is to chart new waters.
Yeah.
Right. This is the life cycle of ideas in the entertainment industry, and in most industry, I guess. You've got small upstarts that try new things, that experiment, that fail a lot. Every now and then, something gets, a mechanic or an idea really resonates, and then that gets absorbed into mass culture. You'll see like AAA will steal every good idea that comes out of indie to make their game that appeals to everybody, and that's just the way of things.
Sure.
It's our jobs to be the innovators.
On the topic of kind of continuing the ADR brand and moving it forward, so clearly we've talked about like you're done with it. Amir has done a lot with it on bringing it to other spaces. Have you ever considered kind of opening it up to the community to continue open sourcing it, making it modelable?
It is open source.
Have you ever kind of tipped your hat to particular expansions or particular growths off of it?
Yeah, actually, there's a really recent one. So a dark room. All of my games are open source. You can find me on GitHub at github.com/doublespeakgames. All of the games that I've released are open source. The code is there. I'm not a terribly responsive maintainer of the repositories, but it gets done. A dark room itself actually got a lot of open source contributions. So it's translated into like 30 languages or something now. There were some content additions, so like a few new encounters, a couple little things. The biggest one, and this was relatively recent, someone went through and added 8-bit sound to the whole game. So did entirely custom-made sound effects and background music. And I was really resistant when this issue came up on GitHub. There was like, hey, I'm thinking about doing sound. What do you guys think? And I was just like, I don't know. Like the sparseness and emptiness of it is kind of what I like about the game. And they went away and did it anyway. And, put their version up on their website with sound in it. And holy shit, it's awesome. Like the sound is great. It fits perfectly with the aesthetic of the game. Everything is really, really well done. And so I contacted the developer and was like, hey, you want to make this official? And they were like, yeah, absolutely. And so it's been rolled in. It went live last week, maybe on adarkroom.doublespeakgames.com.
So that's the sound in the website version?
Yep, sound and the website version. So I mean, the website version and the iOS version are basically completely different beasts at this point.
Yeah.
The open source community has been working on the web one. Amir has been working on the iOS one, and they're not the same anymore.
That's wild. I mean, it totally makes sense, right? Like, especially if you're on PC, if you're on web, there's way more opportunity to hack than the closed box of Switch or iOS. So
Yep.
having one move to the other, I've actually been exploring that myself. Is like, how do you create a pipeline for content made by users on a PC or web into Switch, into iOS, right? And like bigger companies than us have tried to tackle this and have failed, right? Bethesda has tried to bring mods to console and famously has gotten into some deep shit for that. So like as an indie, you can definitely have a couple one-to-one relationships like you described with the folks that worked on the sound. Is like, what is the process in a way that doesn't put much more burden on you as the developer to have to go through and improve everything and curate? Like, is there a reasonable pipeline to bring that content to the other devices?
I mean, to bring them to the other devices, I almost have a moral hang up there. Like, the people that are doing the work on the open source game are contributing their time for free. They're doing all this work to just contribute to a project that they enjoy. And a dark room on the web is free for everybody to play. So I'm totally fine with, taking someone's free work and putting it in there. But when it comes to the monetized stuff, I would feel really bad about that. Like, if I take the free work that somebody did for the web and then just drop that into this paid product that I'm getting money for, sure, I feel like I've ripped that person off. Like, yeah, I've stolen their labor, and I would need some way to give back to them, and I just don't know what that is.
Yeah. Yeah, is it like a flat up front? Is it a rev share? Like, again, because that it still puts more burden on you as like, oh, you get 1% of rev share or 3% or whatever.
Yeah, and it's already annoying enough for Amir to do all of the financials to figure out what my cut is every quarter.
Yep.
So like...
Yeah, no, I totally respect that. And that is the interesting challenge is like, I feel in some small, tiny violin for Bethesda and other companies that have tried to do this, because I totally get the complications that arise with it. Mm-hmm. You want to allow people on Xbox or on PlayStation or Switch to have the same experience as PC players in these moddable environments, but like there is no pipeline for that unless the platforms open up, which isn't going to happen anytime soon. So
or you build your game to be user content driven from the very beginning, like something like Little Big Planet, yeah, or any of those where you've got the tools built into the game to do the modding instead of allowing people to hack at the code themselves, because the platform owners don't want that because they can't guarantee the stability of the product anymore.
Yeah. Okay, so the next question, this is a good follow-up as well. Have you tracked how many plays you've received on the web?
Absolutely.
And how does it compare to iOS, Switch? How does it compare on platforms?
So I am chronically extrinsically motivated. I desperately need the validation of everybody to make me feel good about myself. And so yes, I track plays. Absolutely, of course I track plays, and I'm watching those things constantly. A dark room, so like peeking at my Google Analytics, over the course of its life on the web, a dark room has 3.6 million unique users and 10.3 million page views.
Wow.
Over the course of its life. And that's from, 20 June or something of 2013 till now. So that's pretty cool. As for iOS, I expect we're probably around 1 million downloads. I don't know if I actually have access to that information. But there's definitely been more plays online, which is exactly what you'd expect, right? Yeah. Right? It's free and there's absolutely no barrier to entry. So of course there's going to be more plays.
Yeah, of course. And Switch, rough guess?
I honestly have no idea. I'd have to ping Amir for that.
Okay. All right. So that, I think that covers all the questions I've gotten in advance. We talked about Switch. We talked about all the wonderful ADR stuff. So the next thing we're going to talk about, we're just going to do kind of this regular segment that I'm going to try to do as part of this, which is us enthusing about games that we enjoy. I'm going to talk briefly about two things I'm into, one in the idle space, kind of idle incremental, and the other just kind of general what I've been up to. And then opening up to you, you can talk about any games that you've been playing, whether they're idle or not. So the first one, I want to give a shout out to Codename for 3 years running for Idle Champions. It got me back into it. For those who haven't seen it before, Idle Champions is the official D&D Idle game. It's on Steam, Congregate, mobile. It's a pretty cool game, especially if you're into D&D lore and kind of that world. It's very much immersed in it, but it is also very much an incremental, very much, big numbers going up. It's pretty cool. Definitely one of those that, like, it's free, worth checking out. But their 3-year anniversary kind of popped them up to the front page of Steam, so it hooked me back in, and now it's running in the background, and it has been for the past 3 days and probably will for the next 12 years. But the other thing I've been getting really into, and this goes to our conversation before about Almost Idle, is I've gotten really into Hearthstone's Battlegrounds mode, which is their kind of like Battle Royale. And what I love about it is the amount of engagement you need per minute is so minimal that I can be doing it while checking email, while, messing around on spreadsheets and doing kind of like very low energy tasks, because it is generally, I think, about every minute and 30 you have to make some decisions. And it's interesting because, card battle games, these very Hearthstone, Magic the Gathering, stuff like that, you're expected to be constantly engaged, constantly there, looking at your cards, switching stuff around, choosing who to attack. And it's interesting that with the auto chess and kind of Battlegrounds variant, they go into what we just discussed of it's almost at this point an idle game, or it's getting those idle aesthetics in terms of the amount of time between decision making. So that's my game enthusing for the week. So Michael, what do you got for us?
Oh man, this is where I have to admit that I really don't play a lot of video games anymore. I play stuff sometimes, and often when I play video games, I'm just sinking back into the stuff that I'm playing for comfort and abnegation. I mean, I've started playing Super Mario World again because I like to 100% that game once a year. As for sort of newish stuff, like I get almost all of my games now through the Humble Monthly Bundle, because it's a constant drip of games that I haven't played usually, and I get to play them. So the last thing that I played through was Don't Nod's vampire game, which is actually pretty great. I really enjoyed it. I love that studio. They do really good work. I am very much into, when it comes to gaming these days, small narrative-focused experiences that are a little bit different. So Don't Nod is great. Like the Life is Strange series is fantastic. All of those walking simulator kinds of games are totally my jam. VR I've been exploring a little bit. So like obviously played through Half-Life Alyx, which is awesome.
Yeah.
If anybody is listening and hasn't played it, that game is amazing, and not just because of the gameplay, but because of all of the little like interaction points. Like everything you have to do is just like a little bit fiddly. You have to play with the world just a little bit, like to make the health stations work and to reload your guns and to like move the bridges into place. You have to fiddle with all the controls, and that just pokes at my interface game love so much, and it grounds you in the world so well. And I want to know how to do that. I want to do something.
I think it's pretty interesting. Alex has the same kind of like growing mod environment that something like Gary's mod had, and it may become the source moddable Gary's mod space, right? Of like, I want to play in VR without having to build the whole framework. Yep. Alex seems to be growing into becoming that, which is pretty cool.
That would be cool. I would love for that to happen. I mean, we're still waiting for the VR killer app, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Quite possibly so. Awesome. So that mostly covers what I had content-wise for our discussion. I'm going to do a quick just kind of heads up for anyone listening for my products, and then I'm going to open it up for you to plug anything you'd like to discuss, and then we're pretty much going to wrap up for today. So for me, Retora Games, Merchant's still going as it always is. Space Merchant has a big update coming out soon. We're adding crew members, so you can actually assign crew to your ships. We've actually also changed it so the progression system has storylines and quests that are unique to each region as you kind of play through the world. So you're bouncing around in the universe doing different things, having different storylines in each region. So that's coming out this week. So that's the big thing for us. Merchant Guilds, the sequel, is still being worked on behind the scenes quietly. Merchant Heroes just had a big combat rework update, and that's live as well. So if you haven't played Merchant Heroes or Space Merchant, both of them in the next week or so, lots of new content. So that's it for Retora. So doublespeak, what you got going on?
Sure. So doublespeak had just finished wrapping up the project that we've been working on for the last year and a bit. It is not an idle at all, but it does dive deeply into my love for narrative and interesting ways of interacting with narrative that are just not possible without these fancy computer devices that we have in our pockets now. So the game is called Penrose. I call it an interactive narrative experience. I'm even hesitant to call it a game because people don't know what the hell to do with it if I call it a game. It's a nonlinear narrative. You start in this middle of a story, and it expands outward, both forward and backward. You can make small changes to the story. So you can't control characters directly, but you can change the environment that changes their behavior, and then the story will change. And so the whole game is sort of unraveling this central mystery and figuring out who you are as a player, like why you're interacting, why the game world is behaving this way. And ultimately, everything is maybe answered. Maybe.
Yeah, perhaps. You got to play to find out.
Yeah, I mean, and it's also, I don't like to tell a lot. If you played ADR, there's a lot of sort of stuff that I never actually explicitly tell you, but I give you enough clues and enough environmental hints that you can probably figure it out. And so that's sort of my approach to narrative. I like to leave enough space in the story for the player to feel that they're part of it and to feel that they've really figured something out when they put some pieces together.
Awesome. Michael, thank you so much for joining us. We have a couple of questions in the Twitch chat, which we can address in chat later. If you're catching this, if you're hearing my voice either on YouTube or in some future podcast form, just know that we have the website idlegamedev.com, which will be becoming something soon. Hopefully by the time someone else hears this, it is a thing. And that'll be a place to find all things information about schedule, future guests, Twitter handles and stuff for current guests. So thank you all for joining us. It's been fantastic. Michael, this has been great. I hope you have yourself a wonderful afternoon. And thank you all for joining us. Bye-bye.
Cheers.